Well, well, well. Well, well, well. Well...
Oh, God! Get on with it!
Let me finish. I've got 2 more whales in me, young lady.
Well, 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 AAA games, if it isn't our old friend, the consequences of our actions. I think just about everyone is fed up with your shit, and we've basically all given up on you. We're either grabbing 1 or 2 single-player titles that are actually halfway past decent. It doesn't help that those titles are usually a remake of an older title, furthering the notion that modern-day video game creators are creatively bankrupt and only survive off of remixing the past, or just moved on to the video game endgame, actually chipping away at our backlogs. Now, I'd be remiss to not at least play a little bit of devil's advocate and point a finger back at the gamers. I don't want anyone going around and saying I hate game developers or anything. The pressure that the passionate consumer puts on big studios like these to deliver more and more only swells larger and larger with every bigger and grander title. Baldur's Gate 3 almost killed Larian Studios, and the timeline where we end up never getting that game isn't as far-fetched as you might think. The devs are caught up in the great tech rift, where no matter who they work with, it's just another great rat race. Only thing they can do is do as they're told, get their cheese, and leave before they're let go to make those quarterly reports look nice. But with all that being said, I can't help think that the bigger is better mindset is just a thing of the past. Harriet Shepard writes in her article, "Why are younger generations embracing the retro game revival?" For Gabby, age 27, known as TikTok on Babes Games, and a growing community of so-called cozy gamers, the appeal of older games lies not in their modern interpretations, but the comfort and simplicity of the past. Though cozy gaming can encompass recent titles too, it's like comfort food, different for everyone, Gabby says. The crossover is common. I game for nostalgia, she says. It eases my mind and lets me escape into a different world. It's an excellent stress and anxiety reliever. Now here's a question for you folks at home. Why can't you relieve that stress with the video games of today? You can, but you won't find that comfort in the AAA scene. The AAA has one new really cool main gameplay mechanic, the swipe. See, you just swipe that credit card of yours and enter the 3 epic numbers on the back end, bam, now you're good. Spend more money, $60, $70, don't forget about that season pass, $100. You want an exclusive PvE mode, $250. Keep spending money and all your friends will just see how much of a winner you are. I can't help but feel that the AAA is doing itself no favors when they use the term whales to describe their small minority of players who shell out hundreds of dollars on microtransactions. I feel as though at this point the transaction is no longer micro. You may as well just call it a macro transaction. Oh, and fun fact, the term whales is also used by the gambling community to refer to high rollers, people who wager large amounts of money, saying that these video games aren't gambling and are surprise mechanics after knowing that little factoid convinces nobody. It's bad enough that casinos exist. The fact they're considered legal only when they're downloadable in your homes feels astonishingly evil. Speaking of invasive, don't forget to let our DRM into your machines to let us monitor your habits so we can pervasively recommend you advertisements in the game you paid top dollar for. Oh wait, did I say paid for? I meant to say licensed. What, you thought because you bought a copy of a game you now own it and are free to manipulate it in any way, shape, or form you deem fit? Don't be ridiculous, you bought a license! One we can revoke at any time, especially if said game is now our current new product's competition. Man, speaking of people who hate game manipulation, Nintendo. It feels like they need no introduction when it comes to hating mods or fan games, or even anything that has to do with them without their proper authorization. But Jesus Christ, did you have to come for the emulators? Yuzu. Okay, I get it. It's an emulator of your current system in the market. You're still developing active products for it, and even though it's on its way out and have yet to fix the Joy-Con problem after 7 fucking years, it still has plenty of life in it. That said, why the fuck did you take down the 3DS emulator? Sure, you could hack a 3DS real easy. I would know. I'm dumb as hell and I did it. But holy shit, 3DSs are still as expensive as they were years ago when they were new. You don't even sell most of the games on the system now, let alone support it. Why do it at all? And don't say IP protection. If they wanted their IPs protected, they'd keep them relevant. They'd have their legacy titles for sale at all times, or at least make games in those IPs and not just keep bumping out the usual suspects. Nintendo has history, and people always want to play their older games. I know it, you know it, we all know it. But most importantly, they know it. Why do you think their games are always full of references to these older titles? It's their literal backbone. I'm pretty sure if you peeled off the wallpaper from the Nintendo Japan offices, you'd find out the building structure decayed past repair way back in the Wii era, and it's being held up by JPEGs of 8-bit Marios. Nintendo will now find ways to make sure you can't play as their characters in Gary's Mod 15 years after the game peaked, but refuses to remaster F-Zero or Kid Icarus. Hell, a lot of content creators don't even make videos or streams of Nintendo games like that because of the stigma of their lousy ass copyright system. And while I'll definitely be picking up that Thousand Year Door remake and Metroid Prime 4 and Mario and Luigi Brothership, the fact we were all collectively shocked by the fact that these games were being made is a striking reminder of how poorly Nintendo treats its own legacy, second only to how much this shit stain resembling the shadow of a childhood memory despises its own fans. At least I know what I'll be getting with these games. Real no microtransactions to sneak in there. Speaking of microtransactions, I'm looking at you, Capcom. First, it started off with Devil May Cry 5's DLC. Orbs purchasable for real money is already weird, but why make Virgil locked behind a paywall? Why not make it so that you can get him from beating the main campaign a la Luigi and Mario Galaxy? Then Resident Evil 8 was a bit more of the same, this time with the overpriced Winters expansion. A 4-hour mini campaign is not worth $20 when Lethal Company is only worth $10. And then there was Street Fighter 6 with their dumbass fighting pass that Tekken 8 would take inspiration from. And then there's Dragon's Dogma 2, $2 to delete and start a new campaign. It's an absolutely horrific blemish on an otherwise fantastic game. I feel that statement can define most of Capcom's work since they decided to put out nothing but bangers since Resident Evil 7. They're mostly good in my book. But this putting basic features behind paywalls bullshit also infected Sega when they put New Game Plus behind DLC and Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. It really feels like nobody does annoying day one DLC like Sega. Shin Megami Tensei? DLC. Persona? DLC. Yakuza? You fucking bet. Sonic the goddamn Hedgehog? Oh yeah! The worst thing is that you know for a fact they're gonna do that to all those IP they said that they're gonna be reviving. Beats original outfit? Yeah, that's gonna be paywalled. If you want white-haired DJ Professor K, that's $5 right there too. Zero Beat? Another $5. Noise Tank Yo-Yo? Yeah, he's $3. Ooh, you know what? Here's an idea. What if instead of letting us make custom graffiti, they paywall the good designs and make the normal free designs ads for other Sega games? The worst thing about saying that sentence was how plausible it sounded. You know what's not plausible? Activision Blizzard putting out a game without something going horribly wrong. Or someone getting fired. Or sexually assaulted. I'd spend longer roasting that shit heap of a company, but I feel like their actions just speak for themselves. Black Ops 6 sure looks cool so far, but at this point something is bound to happen to drag the game through the mud. Okay, as I was fucking writing this, they revealed it's 300 gigabytes. Who the fuck has 300 gigabytes for just Call of Duty? It really feels like these games should just come with an SSD like how Animal Crossing on GameCube came with a memory card. EA. If that doesn't tell you everything you need to know, then tell me what it's like being born yesterday. Square Enix sold Crystal Dynamics, who had one project go bad, so they had a ton of money to sink into AI, NFTs, and crypto. It has now been revealed that the move in tandem with making both their main projects, Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, PS5 exclusives, costed them billions of yen, so now they had to cancel a ton of projects. Hell, as I was writing all of this, Square Enix just announced they're going full multi-platform. About fucking time. Welcome to the 21st century. Ubisoft. Oh, fuck, dude. Firing everyone, sexual harassment, toxic working conditions, NFTs in their games, not wanting players to own their own products, and the creation of quadruple A games. Skull and Bones is just a mediocre business manager. I think their biggest crime was killing Rayman and then bleeding his corpse dry. Even its biggest moneymaker, Rainbow Six Siege, got some new subscription service that was so bad it got booed. Man, how long was it since they announced Beyond Good and Evil 2? They're never coming out with that shit. WB Games saw that the single-player Hogwarts Legacy was the best-selling game of last year, despite the cancel mob going on an absolute death parade against it. Meanwhile, Suicide Squad Killed the Justice League, a live service game which did irreparable damage to the Batman Arkham universe, ended up losing $200 million. Take a wild guess which lane WB thinks is desirable. Konami. It's just Japanese EA. On an unrelated note, I cannot wait for Death Stranding 2. We may not ever get Silent Hills, but this is the best case scenario of a game developer who was fired. Man, speaking of firings, Microsoft. Regardless of how good their showcase was this time around during the Summer Games Fest, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt every time I saw a good-looking game that actually caught my interest. Firing Arcane after Youngblood and Redfall. I mean, Wolfenstein Youngblood is inexcusably bad, but Redfall was ZeniMax forcing them to work on a game they wanted no part in. And it's not like shitting the bed is Arcane's bread and butter. They made Prey and Dishonored. Those are great games. So while the shuttering of Arcane is debatable at best, closing Tango Gameworks is actually unjustifiable. I played and beat Hi-Fi Rush kinda recently, and it ended up making my top 10 games of all time. I can't combo for shit. I can't hold a rhythm to save my life. I still love this game. Add on top that these guys were the ones who made the Evil Within series, and that should tell you everything you need to know about how good this team was. So, after Hi-Fi Rush ended up being a success from Microsoft's own mouth, tell me why they were dissolved. 343 can't make a game that does well by the fans to save their lives, and they've been working on Halo for well over a decade now. That studio is held together with shoelaces and hubris. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. It just seems that regardless of whether or not you do a great job and make a great product, your livelihood is constantly in jeopardy in the AAA scene, and I feel that's nowhere more apparent than at Epic Games. Yep, the people who champion higher dev wages with a more fair split than Valve are the same people who gut their own staff so they can make more money now that they're pulling their eggs from the platform development basket and all into their only moneymaker, Fortnite. As a platform, Epic Games is kind of a joke. Aside from their free games and Fortnite, why do people actually use them? I think the Unreal Engine is pretty cool, but I kinda see it as the video game dev equivalent to Adobe Premiere. Yeah, it's the industry standard that everyone uses. It's also owned by the corporate equivalent of Satan. How apropos, as according to Glassdoor, Epic Games is kind of like working in hell. Speaking of hell, let's talk about Helldivers 2, and more specifically, Sony. Now don't get me wrong, Arrowhead isn't exactly blameless in all this, but it isn't the devs' fault. A lack of word of mouth from the now ex-CEO and a little too much mouth from some ban-happy Discord mods kinda got this show on the road. But let's not pretend like Sony isn't 95% responsible for all of this. It's not like Sony isn't brand new to being in hot water. I won't even bother touching up on the data breaches, that's just a tale for another time. Sony has just been kind of coasting off the failures of the Xbox One and hasn't really done anything in the hardware space to justify themselves as a good competitor aside from their narrative single-player games that are all functionally clones of The Last of Us. Just recently, they had a new state of play, and aside from the Astrobot game, it all just seems like more of the same old, same old. Now don't get me wrong, I actually like these games, but it's more like a case-by-case basis, and it depends on the studio. Sucker Punch, forgive the pun, delivered an easy knockout with Ghost of Tsushima, a beautiful and historically accurate depiction on the island of Tsushima. God of War is a compelling take on what happens to a man who finally got what he wanted, only to discover what he truly needed all along, as well as showing what the cycle of violence not only does to a person, but the people surrounding them. But these are not the values that Sony champions. Sony believes in their way or the highway. First, it was the stupid expensive proprietary memory cards for the PS Vita that ended up killing the system, and instead of pulling a PS3 and turning that franchise around, they left it out to fester and become a feast for limited run games. And now they're doing the same for the PS5. Instead of making games for the system, which admittedly had gimped sales thanks to COVID, they're now saying it has entered its latter half of its lifespan with less exclusives than I can count on my hands. Now they're saying that the future is in the PC market. You would think they would play ball with Steam, as everyone has already showed how bad the launcher idea was and still is, and they kinda are. Their requirement of the PSN account for Helldivers 2, repealing the sales of the game in so many countries, was an absolute rug pull. It was so bad that all Valve had to do was refund players regardless in the regions that the game is still restricted from purchasing from. Quick side note, let's talk about Valve. They do the absolute bare minimum, and they have that god-awful 30% revenue split, and yet among every single company I've listed today, they are undoubtedly the best present, despite all the problems I have with them. And believe me, I have some fucking problems with them. How this game was available for sale at launch in said countries only to be removed when they finally decided to try to implement their account tomfuckery raises way more questions than answers. Questions like, what were they going to do if we had the PSN account stuff at launch, only to have someone buy it and then realize they wasted their money on a game they literally cannot play because they dared to live where they live? This isn't even the first time they push an indie game underneath the bus. Remember No Man's Sky? Other questions like, why is everyone being laid off despite record profits? Surely it couldn't be related to that large bonus the CEO just handed themselves. And questions like, with everyone constantly being laid off in the AAA space, who the hell would be dumb enough to work for these companies and not just say, fuck it, I'm going indie, shrink my budgets instead of making blockbuster after blockbuster, I'm just gonna make some solid, smaller scoped games. But the question I think you probably have by now is, what then? Is gaming just over? It's all doom and gloom? No, far from it. AAA gaming might be cooked right now, but as long as we're able to make our voices loud and clear for all to hear, we'll be able to show these publishers the way to a proper and healthy cash flow. Just look at the indie scene. Lethal Company, Power World, Balatro, Manor Thunder Ray, Corp Nation, Battle Bet, Animal Well, Bomber, Cyberpunk, Penny's Big Breakaway, Little Kitty Big City, Vampire Survivors, Another Crab's Treasure, Pizza Tower, V-Rising, Crow Country, Gift, Dave the Diver. Smaller budget and less devs are the restrictions that force them to get creative and resourceful with what little they have to work with. These guys managed to turn lead into gold, and gamers have not only recognized this, but have rewarded them for their work and more. All of these games respect the player. They don't try to push any extra transactions, they don't try to champion a cause or steal your data, they want you to play their labor of love and have fun, and that is why people my age have gone back to the past, to play all the cool games that don't suck ass. Back when people could nickel and dime their players outside of an arcade machine, the only way they could make capital was by making their titles as compelling as possible, by making them as distinct as possible, and by making them as fun as possible, not some glitzed up casino. So do me a favor, put your credit card down, go to your shelf and grab a game, dust off an old system and have some fun.